Well, thank you for having me. My name is Chris Gottschalk. I'm with the USDA ARS in Kearneysville, West Virginia. I'm relatively new here, but I'm going to just give you a little bit of a brief outline of our pear breeding program. So with my presentation today, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, the history of our pear breeding program, but also our research vision that we have. In addition to that, I'm going to talk briefly about some current research and some varieties that were released or we're testing. So to give you a little background on myself, I'm a research geneticist by training. I come from Michigan State University, where I studied the genetics of biennial bearing, which I clearly see are still issues, which is both good and bad. I also worked on cultivar evaluations for cider apples, and I helped co-lead a red-fleshed apple breeding program that still is at Michigan State. In addition to that, we did a lot of genomics. That's really what my expertise is in. So really trying to find genetics that are associated with traits of interest. And I joined ARS back in January of 2021. And at the Appalachian Fruit Research Station, which is in Kearneysville, West Virginia, I am part of the Genetic Improvement Unit. And I lead the apple pre-breeding program, which I'm not going to talk about today. And I also lead the scion pear breeding program, which is the only one left in the US. And you might wonder why we still have a pear breeding program on the East Coast. And a lot of that to do is because we spent 100 years doing it. So just to give you a brief history, we started back in the early 1900s by a ARS scientist, or special agent as they went by at that time, who recognized the need for fire blight resistance in pear. And he started a hybridization program relying on hybrids between Asian species and European varieties. And his name was Merton B. Waite, and he started this program, which is now at the site at which the Pentagon stands. So we have a rich history in DC. After Waite, we went through a number of successions. There's a number of breeders involved. We also have a rich history of expanding beyond the metro DC area. We had cooperations in Michigan, at Michigan State. We had one at Stanford for a short period of time, along with a long-running one at Ohio State University in Worcester. After Waite, he transitioned to Magnus, who has a pear named after him, and so does Waite. He continued a lot of the effort to making these interspecific crosses, but he added in some other traits of interest, such as cold hardiness and light ripening. But one continual through line through all these people that I'm going to talk about is they were breeding for fire blight resistance. And after Magnus, we went to Brooks and Vanderswit, who was a team. Brooks was a horticulturist. Vanderswit is the czar of fire blight, as he was known. That's all he studied, and he was a pathologist. So they worked on getting new germplasm from overseas to bring it in for trying to find new genetics for resistance. They also designed a more modern breeding program. Up until that point, it was very archaic. They were just making open pollinations or specific cross-pollinations and planting out trees and waiting decades for them to fruit and flower. They had a much more rapid approach, and I say rapid in quotations because it wasn't fast compared to today. After that, Richard Bell took over in 1979, and he really ushered the program through our probably most productive phase, where we released a number of varieties. That was a major goal of his, along with investigating the genetics of psylla resistance. And understanding that we have genomics and genetics at our power, he started doing some genetic mapping studies. And with Richard, he retired in 2017, and at that point, ARS did not want to replace him, so it kind of went feral. All of our plantings were kind of unmaintained and just left there to stand. So I joined in 2021 and was given purview over the program. And since that time, I've been really working on developing our vision for what the pear breeding program would be. And I see myself sitting right in the middle of everyone in the industry. I want to try to address traits that are related to our producers and growers, to our packers, even to the shipping components of the packing houses. We're also looking at the sellers at the grocery store and ultimately the consumers. And you might be wondering the traits we're targeting. This is a very short list, but it's still pretty long. But the idea is we want to try to address as many problems as we can, because we know there's lots of problems in pear that need to be solved, and cultivar improvement can potentially offer some of those solutions. So some of these traits, obviously span different pillars of the industry. But for like the producers, we're looking, disease resistance. We're looking at, climate resiliency. We're looking at high yielding, precociousness. We're looking at scions that might have dwarfing response to rootstocks that are being used, since we don't have a dwarfing rootstock yet. We're also looking, for packers, long storability. We're looking at, uniform ripening, disease resistance in storage, all the way to the shippers. We're looking there for even ways to phenotype for mechanical damage that stimulates trucking and handling and packaging. And we're making a little progress on that. But we're also looking at, the consumers. So does the pear taste good or not, right? And that's a very complex situation. We're looking at everything from sugars to acidity to phenolics, which give you the bitterness and astringency, to color and shape. So with all this, we are making some progress. I was fortunate to receive some funding from the Fresh and Processing Pear Subcommittee 2 years ago to evaluate not only our germplasm, but some very high value historical breeding lines and cultivars from the collection in Corvallis. And really this is to build up some base information. That way we have a database of genetics and phenotypes that we can start relying on to move the program forward. I'm not going to talk about those results. You can see them in the reviews that are out there on the Washington Tree Fruit website. But some of our other current work is we did have a recent variety release. This is Belle, named after Richard. It's a very nice, sweet summer pear, but I will tell you there is some caveats. This does not have very long storage potential, so it's mostly restricted to probably direct-to-consumer applications, especially when it can be delivered very quickly. It will not store past really 2 weeks, but it does have really great flavor, really great eating experience. It can be eaten fresh right off the tree in a melting texture. And it's also almost completely resistant to fire blight. It's got a 9 out of 10 on the scale of resistance. So it's a really nice, strong germplasm to use in our program and also to release. If you're interested in it, I put a little link there, a QR code to our variety release publication on it. But what I think is most exciting is our test selection. So this is US 79-439-004. And I'm going to only refer to it as 004 from here on out because that's a mouthful. This breeding line really was really quite interesting. I got a couple up here for examples, and I got some more back by the Tree Connection booth that we can sample if anybody's interested. But this variety, I ended up kind of finding it on accident by leaving it in the cooler too long and finding some really nice pristine fruit that tasted wonderful. It has a really high level of bricks. I have 14 listed there, but it tends to actually move up to about 16. So it's a lot sweeter than Bartlett and Anjo. When we compare it to that, it has a nice red blush, and it turns yellow on the background color once it reaches a nice firmness level after storage. We pick it in West Virginia, so we got to caveat that there. Our environment's vastly different than here. So in West Virginia, it's middle of the September we pick it. It sits in the cooler till about the first week of November, and at that point, we see the firmness drop down to about 4 pounds per pressure. With that, I have to also caveat that our storage is just cold storage, 4 degrees. We don't have CA storage, so we don't know much of our information on how long this can store or how we can better store it in better conditions. It's also stored in a cooler with about 100 other genotypes of pear that are all respiring, rotting, scalding, giving off gases that are affecting us. But for it to stand up to those conditions and still be quite tasty and pleasantly a good appearance, I call that a win. With that, we also have some tree traits that I think are important, particularly to the growers. I have a photo here from the winter a few years ago. You can see the spur formation on this older tree. It's very abundantly forming spurs. It tends to not have any biennial nature from what I've observed the last 4 years. It's very tolerant to fire blight. And we also believe it might have some psylla resistance. And the reason for that is this is the complex pedigree of 004, which is on the far left here. The top right, or I guess going to the right on the top, is the pedigree for Comeece, which is one parent. On the bottom is really the breeding program's efforts to develop the parent on the other side. And in there, we actually have a hybridization event with Illinois 76, which is a Pyrus urensis hybrid. And that provided psylla resistance to its progeny. So we hope to evaluate this in the future for psylla resistance to prove that hopefully it carries it, but that at least the pedigree is indicative that it could potentially contain it. Now this is a photo of the tree. It's semi-dwarf on 87 or 97. My notes are a little unclear on what my predecessors planted it on, but it's a very nice tree. It's abundant in fruit crops. I think this photo was from 2 years ago. We've cleaned it up since. This was about a year after we kind of found it and rehabbed it from its feral state. And we are starting to see some more vegetative growth, but at that point, it had basically just formed spurs and wasn't really putting on any vegetation growth beyond what you can see here in terms of height and size. As far as testing, we are working with a number of universities to evaluate it. I see Stefano's in the audience. He's asked to have some put into a trial. We're also getting some down at Oregon State with Ashley Thompson. And we are doing some advanced testing with this material, and that's in cooperation with Varieties International and Tree Connection. The USDA is just not well positioned to evaluate new releases. We just don't quite have the extensive network that academic units have, so finding a cooperative research and development partner is critical for evaluating this material at more lengthy and higher numbers. So with that, one final thing, this is kind of my approach that we're working in the breeding program and some of the populations we're working on generating. So we've been busy the last few years as I was familiarizing myself with Pyrus. Coming from Malus, I needed to do a little time to understand pear, but we're working on generating lots of new populations to enhance germplasm and targeting traits that I had on that list. We're also working on generating mapping populations, which I did not list here, and we're also trying to speed up our process. You know, everybody has waited decades for pears in this program, and a good example is 004. It was crossed in 1978. Here we are in 2024, just now moving it on. I don't want to have to wait, 40 plus years to make selections. So we're starting to now move on to grafting our seedlings right away to Old Home by Farmingdale 87 and getting them into higher density situations to start trying to force some precocity. That way we can evaluate the material quicker. So with that, there's tons of people involved in this project and lots of help. I do want to thank Varieties International to help lead this effort with 004. And I brought some with me that came out of my pretty rudimentary cooler system. So if you're interested in trying it, I recommend you coming down to their booth. We have some out there that we'll cut up some slices with, and you can get the taste test. As far as its flavor, I call it pretty exotic. I think it definitely stands out among what else is out there.